Welcome to Starbound. My name is Chikondi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please quickly check below to see if you've subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free, and it just helps make sure that our videos pop up in your feed more often. Excret Terpiary's four-fingered hand moved methodically across his desk's holoscreen, sorting application files into neat categories. His long, segmented neck bent forward, bringing his angular face closer to the display as compound eyes studied each detail. The gentle hum of the fledged Vulture's idle engines provided a familiar backdrop to this frustrating task. Rejected, 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 he muttered, antennae twitching with each dismissal. The applications were depressingly similar. Inexperienced laborers or retired salvage workers looking for easy work. None had the skills or physical capabilities needed for serious salvage operations. A shadow fell across his desk as Crag entered the office. The reptilian's heavy footfalls announced his presence before his broad-snouted face appeared in the doorway, scales gleaming dully in the office's soft light.
"Still at it, Captain?"
Crag's gravelly voice carried a note of concern.
"Been 3 weeks now."
"And likely 3 more at this rate."
Excret's mandibles clicked in frustration.
"No one wants to work salvage after what happened on the Crimson Star job. Anything worth retrieving these days is too dangerous for standard crews, but anyone qualified won't touch it because of the risk."
Crag's tail thumped against the doorframe as he shifted his weight.
"We could try the outer colonies. Might find—"
"Already did,"
Excret interrupted, bringing up another set of files.
"Got exactly 2 responses, both from species that can't handle our atmosphere mix."
He paused, antenna drooping slightly.
"Sometimes, I wonder if it's time to sell the Vulture. Find something safer."
"You don't mean that."
Crag's scales rattled, his species equivalent of a headshake.
"This ship's your life. We just need to think differently about staffing."
Excret was about to respond when a notification flashed across his screen. New application, just submitted. His antenna perked up as he opened the file, then slowly flattened against his head as he read.
"Humans,"
he said finally, voice carrying equal parts interest and uncertainty. Crag moved fully into the office now, peering at the screen.
"All 5 of them together? That's unusual."
"Everything about humans is unusual,"
Excret muttered, but he didn't dismiss the application. Instead, he began pulling up supplementary data about human workers.
"They're strong for their size, good endurance. But look at these incident reports. Property damage, unauthorized modifications, complete disregard for standard procedures."
"But they get results,"
Crag pointed out, one clawed finger tapping a performance metric.
"And they're asking for reasonable pay."
Excret's compound eyes studied the numbers again. The humans' collective work history was impressive, if chaotic. They'd worked together for years in various industries, always as a group. Their references were excellent, though several noted their unique approach to tasks.
"They could be exactly what we need,"
Crag pressed.
"Different enough to handle the challenges, experienced enough to be useful, and they're clearly loyal to each other. Might help avoid another Crimson Star situation."
Excret's antenna twitched as memories of that disaster surfaced. Half his crew walked out mid-operation, the others following within days. Only Crag had stayed, helping him limp the Vulture back to port. The humans' group loyalty suddenly seemed very appealing.
"I'll need to completely revise the orientation materials," he said finally. "Everything we know about human workplace culture suggests they respond poorly to standard approaches."
Crag's mouth split in a toothy grin.
"That's a yes, then?"
"That's a we have no better options,"
Excret corrected, already pulling up templates for the orientation package.
"Send them an acceptance notice. But Crag?"
He looked up at his second-in-command.
Let's keep the Crimson Star incident to ourselves for now. No need to start things off with that particular story.
Of course, Captain.
Crag's tail swished as he turned to leave.
I'll prepare the crew quarters for multiple occupants. Humans prefer to share spaces, apparently.
Alone again, Excrit began meticulously reorganizing his orientation materials. The standard procedure documentation would need significant modification. Humans responded better to goal-oriented instruction, rather than rigid process guidelines, according to these initial searches. They'd need more flexible break schedules, different atmospheric settings in their quarters. His antenna twitched again as he worked. The fledged Vulture was about to become the first alien vessel with a human crew. He only hoped he was prepared for whatever that meant. Excrit stood at the fledged Vulture's primary airlock, antenna twitching as he checked the time again. The humans were due to arrive in exactly 3 minutes. He'd prepared everything meticulously. Orientation packets, atmosphere-appropriate protective gear, a carefully planned tour route.
Relax, Captain,
Crag rumbled from beside him.
You're making my scales itch with all that fidgeting.
Before Excrit could respond, a loud bang echoed through the hull, followed by muffled voices from the exterior access panel. His compound eyes widened as the manual override engaged, a system that hadn't been used in years. The airlock cycled open to reveal a broad-shouldered human with close-cropped gray hair and weathered features, wearing what appeared to be a makeshift environment suit cobbled together from standard parts.
Norman Hawk,
the human announced cheerfully, already removing his helmet.
Sorry about the override. Atmospheric readout showed compatible mix. Figured why waste time with docking procedures?
He stuck out a hand, then seemed to remember xenocultural sensitivity training and quickly withdrew it.
Aye, yes, well.
Excrit's carefully prepared welcome speech derailed as 2 more humans appeared behind Norman, arguing intensely about something.
Look, Yuri, I'm telling you the power coupling was fine.
The speaker was lean and dark-skinned, with intricate patterns shaved into his short black hair.
Fine like that converter you fixed on Johnson's rig, Terry.
The other human, presumably Yuri, was shorter but solidly built, with pale skin and a shock of vivid red hair.
Because I remember how that ended. That was 1 time, 3 times. The other 2 didn't explode.
Excrit's antenna flattened against his head as he tried to process this chaos. Where was the orderly procession he'd planned? The formal introductions?
Don't mind them,
Norman said, apparently reading Excrit's distress.
Terry and Yuri are our engineers. They've been having this argument since university. Oh, and here come the others.
2 more humans appeared, one carrying what appeared to be several large containers of food, while the other juggled an assortment of personal items.
Jacob Anders,
said the food carrier, a tall human with copper-toned skin and long black hair tied back.
I've brought snacks. Never start a new job without snacks.
He paused, looking uncertain.
You do eat, right? I mean, obviously you eat, but... Victor, catch!
The lost human, whose shaggy brown hair seemed to defy gravity, tossed something toward his companion. Jacob managed to snag it without dropping his containers.
Damn it, Vic! I told you to pack your own stuff.
But Jacob was grinning as he said it. Excrit's mandibles clicked rapidly as he tried to regain control of the situation.
If we could perhaps proceed with the formal... Is that a Mach 3 atmospheric processor?
Terry had somehow gotten past him and was examining a wall panel.
These were discontinued years ago. The efficiency rating is terrible, but if you bypass the secondary, no unauthorized modifications!
Excrit's voice rose slightly.
We have procedures already done,
Terry announced, cheerfully, having somehow retrieved a toolkit Excrit didn't see him walk in with.
Just had to adjust the cycle timing. Should save you about 20% on atmospheric cycling costs.
Crag's tail thumped against the deck as he tried to suppress what sounded suspiciously like laughter.
Captain,
Norman's voice cut through the chaos.
He'd somehow corralled his companions into a rough line.
Maybe we could start with quarters assignment. Give everyone a chance to stow their gear before the official stuff.
Excret seized on this suggestion like a lifeline.
Yes, of course. If you'll all follow me.
Race you there! Victor shouted, already sprinting down the corridor Excret had indicated.
No running in the... Wait, how do you know where?
Excret's voice trailed off as he realized the humans had already memorized the ship's layout from the schematics in their application package.
Don't worry, Captain,
Norman said, falling into step beside him as the others charged ahead.
They're always like this at first. Give it a day or two, they'll settle into a rhythm.
Excret's antenna drooped slightly.
Are they always so... chaotic?
Norman grinned.
Actually, this is them being professional. You should see game night.
Ahead of them, an argument had already broken out about room assignments, with Terry insisting his equipment needed to be closer to the engine room, while Yuri claimed priority based on that incident with the sonic shower on the last job. Crag moved up beside them, scales rattling with poorly concealed amusement.
Well, Captain, you wanted different. I'd say you got it.
Excret watched as Jacob began distributing snacks to diffuse the argument, somehow simultaneously helping Victor organize his scattered belongings and offering suggestions about equipment placement that satisfied both engineers.
Different,
he muttered, checking his carefully prepared schedule and realizing it was already irreparably derailed.
Yes, that's certainly one word for it.
1 week into the humans' employment aboard the fledged Vulture, Excret walked through his ship in a state of perpetual bewilderment. Every day seemed to bring new modifications to their workspaces, each more baffling than the last. His first stop of the morning was engineering, where Terry and Yuri had somehow completely reorganized the main control room. The standard clean lines and efficient layout had been transformed into what could only be described as the makeup room of a sci-fi television set. All colorful wires, bits and bobs and doohickeys. Except, unlike such a set, Excret recognized many of these as parts that should be inside his ship, and not on floors and desks in various states of repair. Terry's station, in particular, was plastered with old-fashioned paper diagrams and sticky notes covered in cramped handwriting. Empty energy drink containers formed a precarious pyramid next to his console. "It's a progress tracker," Terry explained without looking up from his work. "Each can represents a system optimization. 17 so far."
And the drawings?
Excret's antenna twitched as he studied a particularly detailed sketch of what appeared to be the ship's waste recycling system. "Sometimes you need to see things analog, you know? Digital's great, but there's nothing like pencil and paper for working out the real complex stuff." Terry grabbed one of the diagrams. "Like here, figured out how to increase processing efficiency by rerouting through the secondary..."
What happened to the standard diagnostic interface?
Excret interrupted, noticing the modified display. "Oh, Yuri's got that one. Show him, you." Yuri's workspace was, if anything, even worse. The walls were covered with what appeared to be photographs of machinery in various states of repair, along with detailed notes in multiple languages. His console displayed information in a dizzying array of colors and formats that made Excret's compound eyes hurt.
Color coding is essential,
Yuri said, pointing to the screen.
Red for critical systems, blue for life support, green for non-essential. The blinking ones need attention soon, but not immediately. The ones that pulse are running diagnostics. The ones that spin are... Enough!
Excret's mandibles clicked rapidly.
This is completely non-standard. How can anyone but you possibly understand this system?
That's the point! Both engineers said simultaneously, then grinned at each other. Moving on to the cargo bay didn't improve matters. Jacob had transformed the loading station into what he called a proper workspace, complete with a small garden of potted plants.
They help filter the air!
A collection of preserved food items from various worlds. Never know when you'll need a snack. And what appeared to be a small shrine dedicated to someone called Joe, decorated with strange white-handled cups. Victor's maintenance bay was... Tools were arranged in patterns that made sense only to him, interspersed with small figurines and trinkets from dozens of worlds. Music played constantly from speakers he'd installed without authorization, and the walls were covered with what he called inspirational posters, featuring Earth animals in improbable situations. "The cat hanging from the branch," Victor explained earnestly when Excret asked, chuckling lightly. "Hang in there." Only Norman's station showed any semblance of order, but even that was deceptive. His neat arrangements of personal items each seemed to have some bizarre secondary purpose. The small clock he'd mounted displayed time in 3 different systems, none of which matched ship standard. His chair had been modified by what he called proper lumbar support. Even his datapad had been customized with some kind of protective case that made it look like ancient Earth technology.
"Captain,"
Cragg's voice interrupted his inspection.
"got a minute?"
Excret followed his second-in-command to a quiet corner, antenna still twitching with agitation.
Did you see what they've done to their workstations? The unauthorized modifications alone.
"Are improving efficiency by at least 30%.
Cragg finished.
"I've been monitoring their work output. Whatever they're doing, it's working."
But the disorder, how can they possibly...
Remember that old Earth video in their application package? The one about personalization in their historical workplaces?
Excret's antenna drooped slightly.
I thought that was an exaggeration.
Apparently not.
Cragg's tail swished thoughtfully.
But look at the results. Terry and Yuri have already optimized half the ship's systems. Jacobs reorganized our cargo storage to increase capacity by 20%. Victor hasn't lost a single tool since he implemented his system, bizarre as it looks. And Norman's coordination of it all.
It makes no sense,
Excret insisted.
How can this level of personalization possibly improve performance?
A crash from engineering interrupted them, followed by Terry's voice. No problem. That was supposed to fall over. Part of the process.
Better go check on that,
Cragg said, scales rattling with amusement.
But, Captain, maybe it doesn't have to make sense to work.
Excret watched his second-in-command head off to investigate the crash. Through the cargo bay door, he could see Jacob carefully tending his plants while simultaneously directing a complex loading operation. Victor's music drifted through the corridors, somehow making the ship feel more alive. None of it followed proper procedure. None of it made logical sense. And yet, undeniably, his ship was running better than ever before. Excret's morning inspection route had grown considerably longer since the humans joined his crew. Today, he found Terry sprawled half inside a maintenance shaft, surrounded by tools arranged in concentric circles on the floor. The outer ring is for initial diagnostics, Terry explained without emerging, his voice echoing oddly in the shaft. Middle ring for common repairs, inner ring for specialized tools. Never have to look for anything this way.
And the...
Excret gestured at a series of small electronic components balanced precariously on the edge of the shaft. Temperature sensors. Set them up like dominoes. If anything overheats, they fall over. Way faster than waiting for alerts. Excret's antenna twitched as he tried to formulate a response. Before he could, Yuri's voice echoed through the comm system, which now played a different tone for each crew member.
Terry, need you in engine room 3. That power coupling you said was fine? Not fine.
It was fine until you adjusted the load balancing, Terry shouted back, somehow extracting himself from the shaft without disturbing his tool arrangement. Also, did you take my lucky screwdriver again?
It's not luck, it's just better quality. And I left you something better anyway.
Terry rolled his eyes, snatching up several tools without looking. He always does this.
Swaps out my tools for upgrades without asking. But watch! He held up what appeared to be a heavily modified hydrospanner. Bet you anything he's already calibrated it perfectly for whatever's wrong with that coupling. In the cargo bay, Jacob had expanded his garden to include several hanging plants that somehow didn't interfere with the loading equipment. He was currently directing 3 different operations simultaneously while preparing what he called a proper lunch.
Food brings people together,
He explained, expertly maneuvering a cargo loader with one hand while stirring something that smelled surprisingly appetizing with the other.
Besides, since I set up the plants, air quality's up 15%. Check the readings.
Excret had to admit the atmospheric data showed marked improvement, though he wasn't entirely sure how the seemingly random arrangement of vegetation achieved this. Victor's maintenance bay had evolved into something resembling an obstacle course, with tools and spare parts arranged in what he insisted was a flow-optimized configuration. He was currently sliding between workstations on a modified chair, calling out inventory numbers while his music player cycled through what he called his productivity mix.
Everything's exactly where it needs to be,
he said, somehow managing to catch a tool Norman tossed him from across the room without looking.
Did you know if you arrange heavy equipment based on lunar phases, you never lose track of maintenance schedules?
That makes no logical sense, Excret protested.
Hasn't missed a scheduled maintenance yet,
Cragg noted, appearing beside them.
And repair times are down 30%.
Norman's station remained the eye of the storm, though closer inspection revealed an intricate system of notes, reminders, and tracking methods disguised as personal decorations. His ancient Earth technology-themed datapad case apparently contained backup power cells that had already proved useful during 2 separate system hiccups.
It's all about anticipation,
Norman explained, directing Terry and Yuri to their next tasks while simultaneously updating their mission schedule.
The more compatible people are, the better they anticipate each other's needs.
As if to demonstrate, he caught a datapad Jacob had tossed toward him without turning around, approved the requisition displayed on it, and sent it spinning back in one smooth motion. Jacob caught it while balancing 3 cargo manifests and a steaming cup of what Excret had learned was called coffee.
Captain,
Cragg rumbled quietly.
Preliminary scan results just came in for that derelict in Sector 7. Might be worth looking into.
Excret absorbed the organized bedlam around him. His ship hummed with activity, every system running at peak efficiency despite, or perhaps because of, the completely unorthodox methods being employed.
Send them to Norman first,
he found himself saying.
Let's see how they handle a real salvage operation.
Cragg's scales rattled in approval.
Already did. They're working up preliminary plans now.
Through the open doorway, Excret could see Terry and Yuri's argument about the power coupling had evolved into some kind of collaborative repair technique involving 3 different species engineering principles and what appeared to be a repurposed food processor.
I suppose,
he said slowly, antenna swaying thoughtfully.
It doesn't matter as long as they work well when it comes to the real job.
The derelict loomed before them, a massive cargo hauler listing badly to starboard. Emergency lights still pulsed weakly along its hull, creating strange shadows in the void. Excret stood on the fledged Vulture's bridge, reviewing his carefully prepared operation plan for the 4th time.
Initial scans show structural damage in sectors 3, 5, and 8,
he began, turning to address his crew.
Standard procedure would be to...
Already suited up, Terry's voice came through the comm. Excret's antenna snapped up in alarm as he realized all 5 humans had somehow silently left the bridge during his briefing.
What? Wait! We haven't established the approach vector, or...
Got 3 vectors mapped. Norman cut in smoothly.
Yuri's running final checks on the magnetic grapples now. Victor's prepped the emergency gear, and Jacob's got the cargo bay reconfigured for maximum capacity.
But the procedural review. Talk and work. Jacob's voice now, accompanied by the sound of loading equipment. Terry's got a great idea for stabilizing that list using our port grapples. Could save us hours of reorientation time. Excrit's mandibles clicked rapidly as he turned to Crag. They can't just... We haven't... The procedures clearly state...
Captain,
Crag rumbled, tail swishing with barely contained amusement.
maybe we should just watch what they do.
The next few minutes were simultaneously terrifying and fascinating. The humans moved with practiced coordination that somehow looked completely random. Terry and Yuri had already crossed to the derelict, bickering constantly over the comm about the best way to restore minimal power while simultaneously executing a complex series of repairs on the airlocks. If you just let me reverse the polarity. That hasn't worked since Star Trek, Terry. Hand me that bypass module. The red one or the blue one? The one from my lucky toolkit, obviously. Meanwhile, Victor had somehow rigged a network of emergency beacons that mapped safe paths through the damaged sectors. The beacons seemed to be partially constructed from spare parts and what looked suspiciously like components from the crew's entertainment system. Music helps you work. Lights help you see. So musical lights help you work and see, was his only explanation. Jacob had transformed the cargo bay yet again into a new configuration. All the plants were gone, thankfully, but now all of the loading equipment was organized for maximum carriage. Though to Excrit it looked like barely controlled disarray. But somehow, every piece of salvaged equipment that came through found its way to exactly where it needed to be. Half of it literally floated into the cargo bay after one of the others simply tossed it in the general direction, leaving Jacob to catch it with the grav hook. It's all about flow, Jacob explained while simultaneously coordinating 3 different loading operations and preparing snacks for the salvage teams. Like cooking, everything has its place and time. Norman directed the overall operation from what looked like completely random positions around the ship, always somehow exactly where he needed to be moments before someone needed him. His casual suggestions carried the weight of orders without ever sounding like commands.
Terry, that power coupling you're about to fix, might want to check the secondary grid first. Yuri, think Jacob could use some help with that next load. Victor, maybe tone down the beacon lights in Sector 5. They're reflecting off the hull and blinding the port approach.
Excrit watched in amazement as the humans naturally adjusted their tasks and positions, maintaining constant communication through a mix of technical jargon, personal jokes, and what seemed to be completely random observations about the work at hand. These lights remind me of that club in Singapore.
Spanner!
Speaking of Singapore, remember that maintenance job where little more power to the starboard grapple?
Anyone seen my lucky welding mask?
Check Terry's station. He borrowed it Tuesday. That was Wednesday, and I already put it back under your Spider-Man figurine. The operation proceeded at a pace Excrit wouldn't have believed possible. When Terry's initial stabilization plan hit a snag, the crew adapted instantly, switching to what they called Plan Q with no apparent confusion or delay. Why Plan Q? Excrit asked Norman during a brief lull.
Plans A through P didn't account for the secondary hull breach we found,
Norman replied as if this explained everything.
But Terry had this great idea about using magnetic field resonance to...
Secondary breach? Excrit's antenna shot up in alarm. There was no secondary breach in the scans. There is now, Terry's voice chimed in. Don't worry, we found it before it became a problem. Yuri's patch job should hold until we finish stabilizing the primary systems.
You know,
Crag observed quietly,
a standard crew would have called for a full stop and reassessment by now.
Excrit had to admit he was right. By any normal operational standards, they should be neck-deep in procedural reviews and safety assessments. Instead, his crew was adapting and solving problems faster than they could arise. Think I found the cause of the list. Victor's excited voice came through the comm. Looks like a coolant leak caused cascade failure in the gravitational stabilizers. Hey, Terry, remember that thing with the gyroscopic compensators on the Martinez job? Oh yeah, Yuri, grab your toolkit and meet me in Section 8. Norman, we're gonna need about 20 minutes and possibly a miracle.
Jacob's already prepping the equipment you'll need, Norman replied. And Captain, you might want to watch this next part. It's going to be interesting.
Excrit's antenna twitched as he watched Terry and Yuri disappear into Section 8 of the derelict. Their earlier chatter had devolved into rapid-fire technical discussion that mixed at least 3 different engineering traditions with what sounded like quotes from old Earth entertainment. If we reverse the quantum, Terry, I swear if you say polarity one more time. Fine, but if we remodulate the... Already on it. Hand me that spanner. No, the other spanner. The lucky one. A series of warning lights suddenly flashed across the Vulture's main display. The derelict's list was increasing, its massive bulk slowly rotating toward them. Excrit's mandibles clicked rapidly as he calculated the shifting vectors.
All teams, fall back to...
He began, but Norman was already speaking.
Victor, how's that anchor point in Section 3?
Solid as my grandmother's fruitcake, which is... Actually, that's a bad comparison. Her fruitcake could break windows, but the anchor's good.
Jacob, cargo bay status?
Braced and ready. Also, someone should really tell Terry and Yuri that I can hear them plotting to rebuild the entire stabilization system. Again. Excrit watched in mounting concern as the derelict's rotation continued to increase. His crew seemed to be executing half a dozen different plans simultaneously, none of which followed any salvage procedure he'd ever encountered. The situation demanded a central authority, a clear chain of command. The derelict suddenly lurched, emergency lights flickering wildly. Slight problem, Terry's voice crackled through the comm. Remember that coolant leak Victor mentioned? Turns out it's less of a leak and more of a pressure-assisted rapid deployment system.
Translation, it's about to explode,
Yuri translated.
We've got maybe 3 minutes to either fix it or clear out. Can't clear out, Norman responded calmly. Rotation's too severe. We'd never get the grapples detached in time.
Excrit's training kicked in. This was exactly the kind of situation that demanded proper procedure. He opened his mouth to order an emergency withdrawal. And then he saw it. Not just the danger, but the pattern hidden in his crew's apparent disorder. They weren't working without a plan. They had too many plans, all operating in parallel. What they needed wasn't procedure, but priority.
Norman,
he said sharply, surprising himself as much as his crew.
Get me a ship-wide channel.
A moment later, he felt the subtle click of the comm engaging. For once, everyone fell silent.
Terry, Yuri, focus on the coolant system only. Forget the stabilizers for now. Victor, redirect power from your beacon network to support their repairs. Jacob, begin emergency bracing procedures in the cargo bay. Norman, coordinate the remaining systems to compensate for the rotation.
The response was immediate. His crew's random activity suddenly aligned into a coordinated effort, their individual skills focusing on specific tasks rather than trying to solve everything at once. Coolant pressure dropping, Terry reported after what felt like hours but was probably only 90 seconds. Yuri's patch is holding.
Rotation stabilizing, Norman added. We've got minimal control back. Victor's power redistribution actually improved our grip on the hull. Cargo bay secure, Jacob chimed in. And I've got hot coffee and cold packs ready for when everyone gets back. Trust me, we're gonna need both.
The next hour passed in a blur of activity. With their efforts properly directed, the humans' efficiency bordered on miraculous. Terry and Yuri's repair actually improved some of the derelict's recovered systems beyond their original specifications. Victor's emergency lighting setup became a template for future operations. Jacob's cargo bay organization handled the salvaged equipment faster than any standard loading procedure.
Not bad, Captain,
Cragg rumbled as they watched the final salvage teams return.
Didn't think you had it in you to improvise like that.
I didn't improvise,
Excrit corrected, antenna swaying thoughtfully.
I just helped them focus. They already knew what needed doing. They just needed...
A leader?
Norman suggested, appearing silently beside them.
Someone to help direct all that creative energy?
Excrit's mandibles clicked in consideration.
I suppose I expected authority to mean controlling every aspect of the operation. But now I see leadership is just...
knowing when to let people work, and when to tell them to,
Norman finished.
Speaking of which, Captain, you might want to check the long-range scanners. Looks like we've got company.
Excrit turned to the display, antenna rising in surprise as he registered the approaching signal. Another salvage vessel, headed straight for their position.
Competitor?
Crag asked, scales rattling in the other direction. Annoyance.
Worse,
Norman replied grimly.
That's the Stellar Horizon. Biggest salvage operation in the sector. And if they're here...
Then this derelict is worth far more than we initially thought.
Excrit finished, understanding dawning. He looked at his crew, tired, satisfied, and already showing signs of preparing for the next challenge.
Well then,
he said, surprising himself with his own anticipation.
Let's show them how the fledged vulture handles competition.
The stellar horizon cut an impressive silhouette against the starfield, nearly twice the size of the vulture, with state-of-the-art equipment gleaming upon its hull. Its approach was textbook perfect, each movement precisely calculated and executed.
That's Operator Thex's ship,
Crag explained, scales bristling.
Very by the book. His crew holds 6 efficiency awards from the Salvage Guild.
Fascinating, Terry muttered from his workstation, fingers flying across his modified console. Hey, Yuri, remember how we adjusted the power grid last week? How much overhead did that give us?
About 40%. Why?
Oh!
Yuri's eyes lit up.
The secondary couplings?
Exactly.
I have no idea what they're talking about,
Excrit admitted to Crag.
Neither do I,
Norman interjected.
but I've learned that when they get that look, something interesting is about to happen.
The stellar horizon's hail came through with crystal clarity, its signal perfectly tuned. A hologram materialized on the bridge, a tall, elegantly proportioned alien with iridescent scales and precise, deliberate movements. Captain Turpieri, Operator Thex's voice carried perfectly modulated authority. I see you've discovered our salvage target. I'm sure we can arrange an equitable division of...
Your salvage target?
Jacob interrupted, not looking up from where he was apparently reorganizing their equipment lockers.
Pretty sure we found it first. Also, Terry, I found that backup power cell you were looking for. It was behind the coffee maker.
Oh, good. We'll need that. Victor, how are those modified grapples holding up? Rock steady. Well, space steady. Well, about as steady as that time we... Focus, Vic. Operator Thex's posture stiffened slightly. I see you've employed human crew members. How innovative. However, the Stellar Horizon's superior capabilities... A series of alerts suddenly flashed across the Vulture's displays. The derelict systems were starting to fluctuate again, its stabilization barely maintaining after the earlier repairs. Multiple critical failures imminent, Thex observed with professional detachment. Standard procedure would be to withdraw and reassess. Oh, we could do this, Terry announced cheerfully. The Vulture's engines suddenly hummed at a pitch Excrit had never heard before, and the ship's maneuvering thrusters fired in a pattern that seemed to defy basic physics.
What are you?
Excrit began, but Yuri cut him off.
Remember that power coupling Terry said was fine, and I said wasn't fine, but was actually fine in a way neither of us expected. Turns out it works great for this.
The Vulture moved with impossible agility for a salvage vessel, sliding into a position that,
by all standard operational procedures, shouldn't have been achievable. Their grapples, modified by Victor's inspiration from old Earth climbing equipment, locked onto the derelict with unyielding precision. Structural integrity at 110%, Victor reported proudly. Don't ask how we got above 100. It involves math I made up yesterday. Your regulations clearly state... Thex tried again.
Hey, Norman, Jacob called out. Remember that cargo loading trick we learned in Singapore? The one that's technically against 3 different safety protocols? That's the one. Do it.
Excret watched in amazement as his cargo bay crews executed a loading pattern that somehow doubled their standard capacity while using half the normal power. Equipment that should have taken hours to safely transfer was secured in minutes. Impossible! Thex's hologram declared as it looked at scanner readings out of view, his perfect composure finally cracking. Those modifications can't be stable! The power requirements alone! All right, Terry snapped his fingers. Almost forgot about the power grid. Yuri, want to show them what we did with the secondary couplings?
Thought you'd never ask.
The Vulture's system suddenly operated at efficiency levels that made Thex's award seem quaint. Every jury-rigged modification, every improvised improvement, every temporary fix the humans had implemented over the past weeks came together in a symphony of organized bedlam. But your equipment is outdated, Thex protested weakly. Our analysis clearly showed... Yeah, about that, Victor grinned. Turns out if you refurbish a Mark III atmospheric processor with parts from 6 different species engineering traditions and one really questionable piece of Earth tech, it works better than anything currently on the market. Who knew?
Captain, Norman said quietly to Excret, might want to make an official claim now. We've got control of all critical sections.
Excret looked at his crew, each one focused on their tasks, their apparent disorder concealing incredible coordination. Then he looked at Thex's increasingly bewildered expression. Operator Thex, he said, letting his antenna rise with pride. I believe salvage rights in this case are quite clear. The fledged Vulture has established primary control of the derelict. Though, of course, he added, remembering something Norman had said about professional courtesy, we would be happy to discuss an equitable division of any secondary salvage opportunities. Thex's hologram flickered as he struggled to form a response. In the background, Terry and Yuri had already begun calculating salvage values while simultaneously arguing about whose modifications deserved more credit for their success. This isn't over, Thex managed finally. The Salvage Guild will hear about your irregular methods.
Oh, good,
Jacob called out.
Maybe they can explain why nobody else thought of using ultrasonic resonance for stack stabilization. I've been dying to know.
The hologram vanished in an annoyed huff. Through the viewport, they could see the stellar horizon beginning a perfectly regulated withdrawal sequence.
Well,
Crag rumbled, his scales rattling with amusement.
That was interesting.
Interesting! Terry looked up from his console. Just wait until they find out what we did to their long-range scanners while they were talking. Excret's antenna shot up in alarm.
You what? Nothing permanent,
Yuri assured him quickly.
They'll figure it out eventually. Probably. Maybe. Definitely after we've finished here,
Norman added with a small smile. Excret looked at his crew, his completely unorthodox, incredibly effective, absolutely unconventional crew, and felt his mandibles click in what might have been a smile of his own. Well then, he said, let's not waste any time, though perhaps someone could explain exactly what you did to my ship's power grid. 5 identical innocent expressions greeted his question, each one hiding what he was learning to recognize as barely contained mischief.
Better to not ask, Captain,
Crag advised sagely.
It seemed Excrit had underestimated just how much his second had had to deal with while Excrit had been busy managing the paperwork.
Better not to ask.
Word quickly spread through the salvage community about the fledged Vulture's victory over the stellar horizon. Excrit found himself fielding calls from potential clients who'd never given his operation a second look before. His antenna hadn't stopped twitching since the third chipping consortium requested their services.
Another inquiry from the Merchants Guild,
Crag reported, tablet in his clawed hand.
They're particularly interested in our, what did they call it, innovative approach to equipment optimization.
Is that what we're calling it now?
Excrit asked, watching Terry and Yuri maneuver through the engine room in what appeared to be a carefully choreographed dance involving 3 different tool belts and a machine that was once a food processor, but had now seen so many modifications that it was hard to tell what it was now. The humans named it, too, with the sticky note, Theseus, whatever that meant. The resonance manifold is almost aligned, Terry called out, head buried in an access panel. Just need to adjust the...
Don't say frequency modulation,
Yuri warned, passing him a tool without looking.
I know you're thinking about it.
I was going to say harmonic convergence.
That's worse.
Norman appeared in the doorway, datapad in hand.
Captain, you might want to see this. The Salvage Guild's quarterly assessment just came in.
Excrit's antenna drooped as he read the report.
17 regulation citations? How did we get cited for regulations that won't even be written until next year?
Though that's probably from when we rebuilt the cargo loader's guidance system, Jacob explained, somehow managing to balance a tray of drinks while updating their inventory logs.
Apparently, adding artificial intelligence for better conversation during long shifts isn't technically approved.
You added AI to the cargo loader?
Not exactly, Victor chimed in from his maintenance bay, where he was teaching the loader in question to appreciate Earth music. We just gave it better pattern recognition and a personality matrix, and some opinions about jazz.
It has opinions now?
Only good ones. The loader beeped appreciatively at Victor's defense of its musical taste.
Captain,
Norman interrupted smoothly.
There's something else. That big salvage operation in the Kestrel Nebula. The one everyone's been avoiding because of the radiation issues.
Excrit's antenna perked up. The Kestrel Nebula operation was legendary. A whole fleet of derelict ships, abandoned after a massive solar storm. Every major salvage operator had taken one look at the radiation levels and declared it impossible.
Stellar Horizon tried it last week,
Crag added, scales rattling.
Failed completely. Operator Threx is apparently still trying to explain to his board why 3 of their ships came back glowing.
Let me guess,
Excrit sighed.
You have an idea.
Better than that, Terry grinned, emerging from the access panel covered in something that sparkled. We have 5 ideas, and they all work together in ways that probably violate several laws of physics.
Remember that thing with the atmospheric processor?
Yuri asked, already pulling up schematics on his colorfully modified display.
Turns out if you reverse the...
If you say polarity...
Flow dynamics. I was going to say flow dynamics.
The point is, Norman interrupted what was clearly about to become another engineering debate.
We think we can handle it. The radiation, the mechanical issues, all of it. But...
He paused, glancing at his crewmates.
But,
Excrit prompted.
But we'll need to make some modifications to the ship. More than usual.
Excrit looked around his bridge, at the jury-rigged systems that somehow worked better than their original specifications, at the personalized workstations that had proven more efficient than any standard layout, at the crew that had turned his orderly salvage operation into something entirely new.
Show me,
he said, finally. The next few hours were a blur of technical explanations that mixed legitimate engineering principles with what looked like science fiction plots. Terry and Yuri had apparently been sketching upgrade plans since their first day aboard, just waiting for the right moment to implement them. The radiation shielding is the easy part, Terry explained, pointing to a diagram that seemed to defy several basic laws of physics. It's the nebula interference that's tricky.
Which is why we're going to adapt that trick we used on the Stellar Horizon scanners,
Yuri added.
but bigger, much bigger.
Have you noticed
Crag murmured to Excret.
that they work better when the job is supposedly impossible?
Victor's contribution involved repurposing their entire sensor array in ways that made Excret's antenna twitch just thinking about them. At this point, Excret might need to find medication for that twitch, as it's steadily becoming permanent. Jacob had somehow calculated exact storage requirements for equipment they hadn't even salvaged yet. And Norman...
We'll need to coordinate multiple drone ships simultaneously.
Norman explained, showing a navigation plot that looked more like abstract art.
The radiation plays hell with standard communication methods, so we've had to get creative.
Creative how?
Excret asked, dreading the answer.
Remember how Victor's been teaching the cargo loader about music?
Before Excret could process the implications of that statement, alerts flashed across every screen. An incoming transmission, marked urgent.
It's the Salvage Guild,
Crag reported.
They're warning us off the Kestrel operation. Apparently they've designated it officially impossible.
Officially impossible, Terry perked up. That's my favorite kind. Yuri, remember the thing we did with the quantum?
Don't you dare say tunneling.
I was going to say entanglement.
Fine.
Excret looked at his crew. Brilliant, unorthodox, and absolutely ready for whatever came next. Then he looked at the warning from the guild, with its carefully worded regulations and precisely calculated impossibilities.
Norman,
he said, feeling his mandibles click in what was definitely becoming a smile.
plot a course for the Kestrel Nebula. Let's show them what impossible really means.